Hi, and welcome back to Military Law Talks. So, today I wanted to cover the preliminary injunction for USAID that was issued by a Maryland district court on March 18th, 2025. And so, I've seen a lot of misinformation and kind of partial information on X. And so, I wanted to read the documents for myself. And then I decided I would just make a video and share them with you. So, I'm going to pull up the court documents and let's take a look at them. So this case is in U.S. District Court in the District of Maryland. I'm going to try to make my screen a little bit bigger. So let's zoom in a little bit. All right, that's better. Okay, so this is a case, again, brought in the U.S. District Court of Maryland, and the plaintiffs are unnamed. But the defendants, and this is important in this case, are Elon Musk in his official capacity and DOGE. And remember, and I will link to a link to this video. So I created a video about what is DOGE, how was it created. DOGE was just a renaming of an already existing government agency that was created under the Obama administration, the U.S. Digital Services. And so those are the only defendants in this case. And this is an important point that I didn't see really talked about at all in any of the media or any information on X about this case. And so that's something that I want to point out, that those are the only defendants in this case. Okay, so this is the opinion of the judge explaining his reasoning for granting the preliminary injunction. And it was actually, he didn't fully grant what was requested by the plaintiff. He denied part of what they were asking for, but granted others. So I'll explain that. All right, so I'm just going to go over some highlighted portions. So a lot of this is just background information, and I will link these documents below. So if you want to take a look and read them yourself, you can do so. All right, so let's find, so a lot of background information, like what is DOGE, who's in charge of DOGE, what does Elon Musk do, what did DOGE do in regards to USAID, and I'm going to call it USAID because USAID is kind of a misnomer. It is, it's important to understand that USAID is essentially kind of a way to show governments like quote unquote soft power around the world. It's kind of like a slush fund for the CIA, things that the CIA or the State Department want to do in foreign countries. They do it under USAID. Okay, so they're granting, it hasn't had a full trial. This is a preliminary injunction, so prior to a full trial. And as I've explained in other cases, plaintiffs have to explain that they have standing. Defendants were arguing that plaintiffs don't have standing, that essentially they don't have a case or controversy, and so their case shouldn't be heard by this court. The judge says that yes, they have an injury. The injury is traceable to the defendants, and it's likely to be redressed by a favorable decision. So the court found that they had standing. And then the court gets to the requirements for this preliminary injunction. And so this is kind of what they're talking about, the issue. And really a big bulk of the opinion discusses really who's in control over USAID. So the plaintiffs are saying that Elon Musk and DOGE are essentially in control of USAID, but the government argues that no, it's really the acting director of USAID and Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, that USAID falls under Secretary of State. So that is something that's kind of at length discussed by the judge. And that was something at issue at the preliminary injunction hearing. And so the judge explains and essentially finds in his opinion that DOGE has control over USAID, and essentially they're kind of de facto in charge. Now, the government disputes that, right? So the government says, hey, we have people who are in charge, or at very least, Marco Rubio is in charge of USAID as the Secretary of State. And so some things that happened is that they froze all government credit cards for all employees and contractors involved with USAID. Payments were not being made. Contracts were being just across the board canceled. And so some of the plaintiffs, not only are they government employees, but some of the plaintiffs are government contractors. So they're like independent contractors who work for USAID and have their contracts canceled. And so they're arguing that, that's their injury, that's how they have standing. And so one of the things that they assert is that the actions that DOGE and Elon Musk have taken have violated their constitutional rights, have violated the Appointments Clause and separation of power. So the judge explains those kind of at length. And so they, like I said, characterize Elon Musk as basically de facto administrator of USDS, that's US Digital Service, that's now renamed US Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE service. And so they're saying that Elon Musk is in charge of DOGE. However, and then through that position, it should really be a position that is what the Constitution would say is a big O, like a capital O officer position that would require confirmation from the Senate. So the Constitution says that the president can elect, officers, and then they should be confirmed by the Senate. So they're making an argument that Elon Musk is essentially in charge of this government agency, and he should be subject to the Appointments Clause in the Constitution, and he should be subject to congressional approval, Senate confirmation. That didn't happen. Obviously, that didn't happen. So the government argues that he is actually an inferior officer position and only needs appointment by the president, which is what happened, does not need to be confirmed by the Senate. So that's an argument that they were making. And to the plaintiffs to support this argument that Elon Musk really needs Senate confirmation, they're arguing that he has significant authority, making him like a capital O officer. And so they argue that Elon Musk is canceling government contracts, refusing to give access to USAID employees who are placed on administrative leave. Though I'm going to tell you that employees who are on administrative leave shouldn't have access to government systems because they are not performing any government duties, so they have no need to access government systems. And then they're also arguing that he's shut down the website, blocking USAID employees from accessing computer systems, and directing the closure of the USAID headquarters. And so in response, the government argues that Elon Musk did not exercise this authority. His role is purely advisory, and they say that he is not the head of U.S. Digital Service, that he is actually just an advisor to the president, to the White. So he answers to the chief of staff of the White House and to the president, not in charge of this government agency. And so there's discussion. The judge in this case does think that potentially Elon Musk would need Senate confirmation. However, also points out that there's case law that says that if his actions or DOGE team members' actions were ratified or approved by USAID officials or Secretary Marco Rubio, then that would cure any of those deficiencies. So this is quoting a case, ratification by a validly appointed officer cures any initial Article 2 deficiencies. And so in this case, it looks like that happened, that all the actions done by DOGE were quickly ratified either before or after. And so I don't really see that there's necessarily an appointments clause issue, but it's definitely something that that the court found, that the court disagreed with the government on, and said that or that found that, yes, that more likely than not, that USAID officials either took or ratified the relevant personnel or contracting officers' actions, and maybe some other actions haven't been, but if the government wants to do it the right way, Marco Rubio should just go ahead and ratify everything that was done. So there's a lot of discussion about Elon Musk and his posting on X, and his actions. And so the court finds that Elon Musk really is in charge. He doesn't buy the government's argument and finds that Elon Musk is trying to permanently close USAID and shut down this federal agency. And the judge in this case doesn't think that the executive branch can do so. Now, this is where I disagree with the judge in this case. So the judge thinks that, and I'll find the place, that the executive branch doesn't have authority to shut down USAID, and so the judge in this case is arguing that essentially Congress can shut down USAID, but the executive branch can't. And so let me find that portion of it. All right. So, and something that I think the judge kind of, this is more talking about their, Elon Musk. There's a lot of talk about Elon Musk. All right. And we'll talk about separation of powers. So this is where we get into the argument is, does the executive branch have the authority to do what they're doing in relation to USAID, or is it really a legislative function? And so is the executive branch violating the separation of powers by doing something that the legislative branch, the Congress, should be doing instead of the executive branch? Now, this is where I differ with the judge in this case, and I think that the judge got it wrong. Now, I think a lot of times judges make a decision and then they find the law or some arguments to support their already made up mind decision. And I think that that is true in this case. And so they say that first he says that this federal agency, USAID, was created by statute. But that's actually wrong. USAID was not created by statute. It was created by an executive order by President John F. Kennedy. So I surmise that if an executive agency can be created by an executive order by the executive branch alone, and it's funny because he states that this federal agency was created by statute, but later in his opinion, he does recognize and state that USAID was created by an executive order and only later was ratified by statute in the 90s, though it was created in the 1960s by executive order. So I think if a federal agency can be created by the executive branch, then it could also be eliminated by the executive branch. Because remember, all executive power per the Constitution is vested in the president. And then the president it's the president's prerogative to create, inferior officers or inferior offices to help carry out his executive powers, what is required to do to, carry out the will of the legislature to execute the law. So again, he talks about eliminating DOGE and, what they're essentially doing. They're firing everyone. So they're trying to shut down USAID. That's what DOGE is doing. The argument that he makes again, essentially that USAID can only be shut down by Congress. However, like I said, I don't think that that's really stated in the law. He does talk about, so this is where he says, USAID was first created by executive order in 1961, and then later talks about the statute, which was this FARA pass, that it's in 1998. So on the one hand, he says it was created by statute, and then the statute he's talking about is in 1998. But we know USAID existed long before 1998. And the law in 1998 is the Foreign Affairs Reform and Restructuring Act, and it designated USAID as an independent agency within the executive branch. And so maybe that's kind of where he's trying to walk this fine line to say, yeah, it was created by executive order, but then it became an independent agency when Congress passed this law in the 1980s. So maybe that's where the argument is coming from. But again, kind of in what I'm thinking, in my opinion, is if the president could create it, the president could also shut it down. But it says in this law that Congress require the president to submit a reorganization plan and then potentially abolish USAID, but that didn't happen. But this was temporary authority that expired December 20th, 1998. So I would argue that this requirement to follow this statute also expired in 1998. So that's why I think that potentially this opinion will be overturned on appeal, or at least that the federal government will be successful in any litigation regarding the executive branch shutting down USAID versus Congress doing it. And so the judge says, that Congress hasn't granted the president the authority. But again, I don't think the Congress would need to, because it was created by the executive branch. So more on that, more on this law, and specifically talking about that, under the FY24 Appropriation Acts, they gave money to USAID. And I will point out it is kind of bad on the government that the Congress just recently passed a continuing resolution. So they didn't make any of the DOGE cuts, even including to USAID and to all the contracts involved in USAID. They didn't codify them in law. They just gave the same amount of money to USAID that they did under the Biden administration. So that really undercuts the government's argument here, where they're saying that the executive branch does have the authority to shut it down when Congress gave them the same budget. And so that is definitely a problem. They also argue that this is, solely within the president's foreign affairs powers. Judge also rejects that argument. And so saying that there's examples of actions to eliminate an agency are rare. Yeah, because our government is always growing, and it's continued to grow, and it never slows down. So the judge in this case does think that this violates the separation of powers, and that only Congress can dismantle or to end USAID. And so the judge finds in this case that it violates the separation of powers. And so let me see. I don't think I have really anything else. A couple other highlights. All right. Oh, so this is another thing that the plaintiffs were complaining of. They claimed that DOGE was posting on their websites these personal service contracts. Remember, I said some of the plaintiffs in this case are independent contractors. So they are not employees, actually have a contract with USAID. And DOGE, in canceling the contract, was posting information that contained their personal information, names, etc. DOGE argument is this information is already publicly available on the Federal Procurement Data System website, which is true. All federal contractors' information is publicly available. And so while the judge in this case thought that this was problematic, that DOGE was posting these contracts on their own website and not redacting PII, again, I disagree with the judge on this case. It's already publicly available. So I don't even know why the plaintiffs would be complaining about reposting publicly available information, but the judge bought their argument and thought that that was causing them harm, that already publicly available information was being reposted on the internet. So just kind of shows this judge is a bit biased, in my opinion. All right. And so, they part of that preliminary injunction, they're asking for the defendants to be barred from posting that personal information. And also, some employees had left personal property in their office at USAID headquarters, but and they wanted access, or they wanted to ensure that the plaintiff or the defendants were not going to destroy that personal property. But as the opinion later points out, those employees were given time to go to retrieve their personal belongings. And so that part of their request is moot, meaning it's kind of no longer a problem. All right, so the court decided in this case they are going to enjoin the defendants, but again, it's just the defendants, Elon Musk and DOGE. So, and then this is more about the opinion. And let me just pull up the actual preliminary injunction, make it a little bit bigger, because it's a little like the highlighted parts are just laid out in this. So again, it's only applies to Elon Musk and DOGE. So as I've said, Marco Rubio, the current administrator of USAID, could take all these actions. This is only stopping Elon Musk and DOGE. They're requiring them to reinstate access for all these current employees and service contractors, even ones on administrative leave, which again, I disagree with, but that's the court order. Now, this could be appealed. And if it is appealed, I'll cover that in a later video. Not to disclose any of that PII, even relating to like the contract. They should redact it. Again, I think that that's overly broad, but they can't take any action to shut down USAID. Again, but it's only Elon Musk and DOGE. So that means that the current administrator, the president, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and more specifically, absolutely Congress could shut down tomorrow if they pass the law, shut down USAID. So Congress absolutely is not enjoined from this. And as the opinion points out, this judge is of the opinion that Congress is the only one who could shut down USAID. So Congress needs to act. Congress could absolutely do this. Then another thing I want to point out is that this injunction does require a bond. So there is a federal rule of civil procedure 65C, and this has been pointed out by a lot of legal people saying that all these injunctions that judges are putting in place against the Trump administration, they're not complying with these rules and they're not requiring a bond. And actually the bond should be the cost to the government if they have this injunction in place, but then later prevail. And the judge in this case argued that there's really not going to be any cost to the government. And so that's why he only required a $100 bond. Now, I kind of disagree with that because there's significant cost, right? If they can't take any actions to, terminate employees, do reductions in force, then that's a cost to the government, right? Continued employment, that's a huge cost to the government. So I think it was kind of a way for the judge to say, yes, I complied, but in reality, really kind of didn't. And so that is kind of in a nutshell the case for the USAID and DOGE and Elon Musk. And so I will update and put links to those documents in the comments below. And as this case progresses, I'll create another video. And so thanks for tuning into this video. If you've been with me this long, make sure you hit the like button, share this video out there, and we'll catch you in the next video. Have a great night.